So Be'ezus Hashem, we're going to start the Mitzvah Hashem, the sugya of Mikra Megillah. I only have one kasha. Why do you think that the Agudah changed the sugya? So the obvious teretz was probably, the Shleishim Yom Koydem HaChag. So Shleishim Yom Koydem HaChag already, this is already Tu B'Shvat. Shleishim Yom Koydem HaChag, you have to start learning Megillah. Is it so pashut that there's a chiyuv of Shleishim Yom Koydem HaChag when it comes to Purim? We find it maybe by Sukkot, we find it taka by Pesach. By Purim, it's not so pashut that there's a din of Shleishim Yom Koydem HaChag. It's a takana from Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have at that point the kimu v'kibloi of Purim. So I was trying to think of a more lamdish teretz. Why is it that the Agudah changed the sugya to a sugya, which is Keidua, one of the Geshmak, the sugya of Megillah, and ongoing into the sugya of Purim and the whole shleimus of learning a sugya like this with shleimusai. So I was thinking of the vort of the Radomska. The vort that the Radomska says on the Megillah. The Radomska says something very nice, a sheina vort. The Goyin himself asked the question. The Goyin says, Murdik, Akasha, the L'chaira, when you go through the storyline of the Megillah, especially if you go in the storyline with the Vilna Gaon. So the Vilna Gaon, the entire Tachlis in the Megillah is to show you how this event led to this event, which led to this event. That's the whole entire idea of the Gaon in his Pirush in the Megillah, is to show you that this led to this, which led to this, which led to this. And then you get the whole picture, and then you see the incredible nace. That's why the Gemara in Megillah says on Daf Yutes, on Daf, Yitches, the Gemara says, that if you read it out of order, you're not Yotze, because you have to see the storyline. You have to see all the Ashkacha Pratis and how HaKadosh Baruch Hu did this, which led to this, which led to this, and which led to the Gevaldik nace, that's the nace Purim. So the only question that the Goyin himself discusses and that the Radomska Rebbe asked was, what about the horse? Vos dafmin the ferd. What do we need the horse for? If you go through the storyline, you would see that it would have been okay if Achashverosh wouldn't have slept that night, which quite possibly, maybe that was the biggest nace, but maybe he wouldn't have slept and they would have told him, it's Mordechai who did something nice for you. But why do we need that whole story with okay, maybe we need to ride Mordechai on the horse, but why do you need the whole story that Haman and all the different shitas of what his daughter spilled on the head of Haman? Every year, my children come back from Gan with different shitas and different minhagim and different mahalchim of what exactly his daughter threw on his head. What do we need all that for? What do I need that? What do I need that for? In the storyline of the Megillah. So the Radomska said that Davar Nifla. The Radomska said that Klal Yisrael were oimid for a nace because they had done tshuva. They had done 3 days of Tainus and Bechi and Sak ve'efer, Yutzal Rabim, and they had done tshuva. So Mamela, they were oimid for a nace. They were oimid for the Kabbalah of the nace and the Kabbalah of that Salah. However, because they were sad, they were depressed. The Ir Shushan was Navoicha. Klal Yisrael were in a matzav of sadness and depression, and it was difficult. As Mamela, they weren't a clay kibbel to accept a nace. They weren't able to get a nace. In order to get a nace, a person has to be in a matzav of simcha, of gewaldige simcha, and they were in a matzav of sadness. Again, they were roi because they had done tshuva. So Mela HaKadosh Baruch Hu instrumented the horse, the whole situation of the horse, that Mordechai should ride on the horse, that Haman should get in his baza and bushes from what happened in the Indian of the horse. Be that when Klal Yisrael should see it, like Yehuda Meisair Simcha V'Sasin Yikaz ein Freilich, ein Lebendigkeit for the Yidden. When the Yidden saw that, they all laughed, they all smiled, they had a Geschmack, they had a Zizkeit, they had a Simcha. And when Klal Yisrael had that Simcha, now they were in a matziv where they were able to be makabel the nace, and to be makabel what was coming to them al yedei, the tshuva that they did was to accept that nace. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought the matziv of the horse, a bee, for one reason, a vadet's necessary for the nace. It was the catalyst for the nace. When Klal Yisrael will be in a matziv of simcha, so then they'll be zeicha to a nace. So I imagine that Agudah, with their tremendous ahava for Klal Yisrael, and their tremendous achrayus for Klal Yisrael, understands that Klal Yisrael in this matziv have done tshuva, doing tshuva because of what's going on. And let's there are people that are still suffering. So now we're waiting for the Rebbeinu Shalom to finally give us the nace, the hatzalah that Klal Yisrael so desperately needs. So we need the only problem is there are a lot of people that are suffering, and there's a lot of people that are bitzar, and there are a lot of people that have agmas nefesh. So the Aguda with their achrayus of Klal Yisrael realizes, so we have to get the oilams on freilich. They got to get the oilam geschmack and lebedik. And Hagam, that Avada, the limud of Shabbos, what the oilam was learning till now was geschmack and simcha. But Avada, there's a frischkeit and a new zman, and a new limud, and a limud of Megillah, which in itself is a geschmack limud, and opens us up to many, many different inyanim of a microphone, inyanim of Arvis and Yonim of Kama halachas and Gishmak halachas. So they have, with that foresight and that achrayus, to get Klal Yisrael into a matzav of simcha, and ein simcha ka Torah. There's no greater simcha than the simcha of Torah and the frischkeit of Torah and the new sugya in Torah. So this Bez Hashem is mistama the amkus of what they are good, and why they decided to start a new sugya and the sugya of the Megillah, so that al yedei that simcha will be zeicha to the nace that Klal Yisrael so desperately need. So let's, without any further ado, let's get to the catalyst of the nace. Let's get to the simcha, the ein simcha k'toira. The Mishabru over here in Simon, I'm going to today try to talk Bez Hashem. There are many, many different shilas that L'tzarenu, I hope don't come up this year. Many different shilas. Not everybody will be able to go to shul, and we might not be able to have the roivam. We hope by then we'll have that nace, but who knows? We might have to wait until Purim to get that v'nahapoichu. So there are many shilas, and the truth is, you never need an excuse on Purim to talk about the out of ordinary shilas. There's nothing ordinary about Purim. If you're having an ordinary Purim, it means you're doing something wrong. So Mamela, it's never anyways. There's no, you don't need excuses to talk about interesting shilas in different cases and different scenarios in Purim. The normal scenario would be everybody goes to shul, they listen to the Megillah, mit roivam and al sting and al skit. But this year, who knows? There'll be people that Nebuch might be quarantined. There'll be people that might be told they can only listen to a Megillah at one time. Should they choose the night Megillah? Should they choose the day Megillah? There'll be people, unfortunately, that won't be able to bring children to listen to Megillah. People will have to have maybe smaller minyanim. Women might not be able to go to Megillah. V'cheina. And our job today, Mitzvah Hashem, and to try to clarify in all of these scenarios what to do. Should I listen to the Megillah on the phone? Should I listen on a microphone, et cetera, all the various situations. I might have my neighbor having a Megillah reading, and I might not be able to go out of my house, and I might not need to listen, but my neighbor has a microphone. Could I listen from his microphone? Our Gedolim have already discussed these shilas, and all I am is a ibezager, is just the words that flow out of me are the words that came from the Paiskim already that discussed it, and maybe just to modernize it to where we're holding in Tafshin Pei Aleph. The Mishnah Berurah in Shulchan Aruch in Tafresh Pei Tes, Hakol Chayovim b'Kriyas Megillah. It has to give you an understanding of what Mikra Megillah is. A Pirsum Hanes. Everybody's chayiv. Men, women, Gadim, everybody. It says the Shulchan Aruch Mechanchen es Aktanim. We even bring the Kinderlach. Because also, like the Bir Halacha explains over here, to be mefarsim the nace, that everybody should be a part of this nace and to see the Ashkachas Hashem in even dire situations. The Mishnah Berurah, right away over here in Zivkatan Aleph, he tells you, well, in Tafresh Pei Tes Zivkatan Aleph, well, you're going to say it's a mitzvah sasei shazman grama, but they're chayav because af hey mayu ba'oisa nace, they were also a part of the nace. Some learn that means they caused the nace, but akopanim af hey mayu ba'oisa nace. So the Mishnah Berurah brings like this: l'chein. Don't forget, therefore, that the young girls that are not married or whatever, you have to make sure they don't come to shul. You have to make sure that somebody is reading for them. Somebody has to come home after Megillah laning. This year it might be a lichatchila, we'll see in a moment. Somebody has to read for the girls because they're also chayiv. Then the Mishnah Berurah, a very interesting lashon. Ubiksas mekoimis, in some places, so the minig is they go to shul. By us, we know that where we come from, a lot of the ladies go to shul. Kimat, where I grew up, everybody in the Haim, alle Freuen the gegangen into the shul. Everybody went to the shul. And then the Mishnah Berurah says, he says only ksas mekoimis. And then the Mishnah Berurah says, achein sarich ian. Mishnah Berurah is not so thrilled with this fact that ladies come to shul, because the Mishnah Berurah says, you have to hear every single word, Rabbi Yisai. And you know, not every lady, especially in those days, knew how to read. So Mamela, every lady is going to know that if she misses a word, she has to make it up, even if it's not in a kosher Megillah. But does every lady have in front of her a chumash and she listens to every word? And if she misses a word, she makes it up. Certainly in those times not. So the Mishnah Berurah calls this ksas noig. Some ladies went to shul, and it sounds like not every lady went to shul. That's one. And also the Mishnah Berurah is not even so thrilled with the ladies going to the shul. Sounds like from the Mishnah Berurah that maybe ladies L'chatchila, it's not the place for a lady to go to shul. The Chelkas Yankiv Reb Reish is medayik that Vice Dice, the Mishabura held, is not even an Indian for a lady to get the roivam. We know that one of the big sugyas over here in Megillah and reading Megillah is roivam. There's a shaila of roivam. Is it more important? We'll see soon maybe to go to a bigger shul, etc. But what about ladies? So the Mishnah Berurah is very meduyik that there's no Indian of a lady to try to get roivam. The Mishnah Berurah should say she should go to shul. If she can get roivam, she should go to shul. A bigger minyan, a bigger matziv. Mishnah Berurah seems to not care at all. First of all, Mishnah Berurah says it's only a few places that the ladies do this. Second of all, Mishnah Berurah is not happy. They're not going to hear. So Mishnah Berurah is not happy about this. The pshat, I guess, being that kol kvuda bas melech pnima, it's not the derech for a lady to be a part of a roiv am. Now, I am aware fully that the Darkei Moshe does have a mashmois not like this Mishnah Berurah. And I saw one of the svarim that he seems to say that he doesn't understand the Mishnah Berurah and that ladies should go to shul and they should get a part of this roiv am. And he brings taka the Darkei Moshe, which is famous. That the Darkei Moshe does say that a woman should go to shul. But I think we all agree that this year, if there's any reason in the world that a lady can't go to shul, or if there's a suffix, if there's enough room in the shul, so then a lady has to know that the Mishnah Berurah held that it's really not even so necessary that she goes to shul when it comes to Mikra Megillah. And so therefore that'll be the first, call it quasi-kula this year. If a lady has any suffix of going to shul this year, for sure this year, she could stay home, which was the pashtus of the Mishnah Berurah, and then someone's going to have to read it for her, which brings us to the next shaila. The next shaila is one of the big shailas in Hilchos Kiddush in general, and Halacha in general, and especially in Hilchos Megillah in general, which is a lady, and that's how the Bir Halacha over here talks right out. L'chayra, a lady, her husband comes home from shul, right? Or the father comes home from shul and he wants to read for his daughter, or any situation of where you have a man and he's reading for, neighborhood ladies or something, and he was already yoytze the Megillah. When a man was already yoytze the Megillah, can he be moitzi a woman? So there's a very interesting Bir Halacha over here. I'll tell you why it's an interesting Bir Halacha. He says, if kfar yotza, if already a lady was yoytze, so then ein moitzi ali shacharis. He says maybe a lady can't be moitzi someone else. So too, a child, not so pashit, can't be moitzi and isha, katan nistapik bezef, they're bechlal arvis. Very interesting Mishnah Berurah over here. He has a suffix. If a woman has arvis, in other words, ad kama that the person wasn't yoytze yet, and you want to know what's the din. Could somebody that wasn't yoytze, of course, if I'm not yoytze, I could be moitzi other people, because that's what the koyach of shemei koina. If I'm reading right now and I have not been yoytze yet, so as I'm being yoytze right now and you're listening in, so one of the ways of being yoytze is by saying it, and one of the words is by listening. So you're listening to me, so you're yoytze too. That's shemei koina. But the Mishnah Berurah is discussing a different koyach here. He's discussing, what if I was already yoytze? So if I was already yoytze, now, when you're listening to me, you can't do Shemei Koina. Now you have to have a new koyach. You have to have what's the koyach of Arvis. Arvis means that if I was already yoytze, can I be moitzi someone else? What's the halavana of Arvis? HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us together at Arvis Moyav, and he was Ma'ariv Klal Yisrael, and he said, Reb Kallus, if you were yoytze the mitzvah of Tkiyas Shofar, that's very nice. But you know that one of your friends yet wasn't yoytze the mitzvah of shofar. That means there's a part of you that has not been yoytze the mitzvah of shofar, because he was connected. All of our neshamas. If right now there's a yid, well, a person wants to know what's the makor to do kiruv. The makor to do kiruv is arvus. If there's a yid right now that's doing an avera, that means there's a part of me because I'm connected. My neshama is connected to his. If there's a person right now that didn't make kiddush yet, so then that means there's a part of me that wasn't yoytze kiddush, because our neshamas are connected. And therefore, if I come home on a Friday night and I made kiddush already, and one of my sons, my bar mitzvah sons, will make an easy case for a minute, he says to me, Ta, could you be moitzi me in kiddush? So the halacha is, there's a part of me that wasn't yoytze kiddush. So therefore we say yotza, even though I was yoytze, moitzi. I could be moitzi. Why? Because there's a part of me that wasn't yoytze yet. So therefore I could be moitzi somebody else. It's a very, very important klal, a very sick klal. Yotza moitzi. If I want to make a bracha on a cup of juice for you, and I'm not drinking now, I can't make the bracha for you because I'm not getting the hana. So how can I do it for you? But if there's a mitzvah, so then the Rebbeinu Shalom connected us my chiyuv, your chiyuv, there's a part of me that hasn't been yotzei if you have not been yotzei. And therefore, if my son says, I haven't been yotzei kiddush yet, and even though I was yotzei kiddush already, but that means there's a part of me that hasn't been yotzei kiddush if he hasn't been yotzei kiddush. So in such a situation, we say, therefore, yotza, even though you were yotzei, you could be moitzi him. Now, it happens to be that we don't do this necessarily lechatchila, because it's more lechatchila, the person should make his own bracha. If you were already yotzei, that's a separate sugya, but that's the idea of arvis. Comes along the Bir Halach over here and discusses a klape the sugya of nashim. Now, I will all have you notice, if you notice, I see that so kindly it has been highlighted, the Bir Halacha. There's one thing that hasn't been highlighted in this Bir Halacha is the words Eshel Avram. In a minute it will be. Now it's highlighted, Eshel Avram. Why is that important? Also, if you notice, it's in brackets. This is a very rare commodity. Why is the Bir Halacha bringing something in brackets? Why? You look through all these Bir Halachas or Baisai, and you're not going to see that. Why does the Bir Halacha not say, like in his regular style? Look in the next Bir Halacha. Ayin Mishtabura, Ayin this, Das Hagra. Look in the next mirror, all over. You see always when the Bir Halacha talks, his style everywhere. This one said this one said this. Do you ever see the Bir Halacha bringing down a sefer in brackets? He should just, he brings the riyaz in the next one, he brings the tashbeit, he brings this, that, whatever. What's this statement that the Bir Halacha brings? And then afterward, he brings brackets, Eshel Avram. Very interesting. So I'm going to tell you the secret. And this is the side that Rabbi Yaakov Zichreinu Levracha, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky Zeichet Tzadik Levracha said over, that the Bir Halacha, when he brings something in brackets, and this is the side that you have a lot of times, you have it in the Balatanya, in the Graz, you have it in a lot of Svarim. A lot of times, especially when he brings it upstairs in the Sefer Mishtabura and the Bir Halacha, and he doesn't bring it in the Sharat Tzion, it means that he wants you to know there's this Acher that said this, but he himself is not so soymech on this. He's mesupik about it. He's not so happy with this. So this is my Sefer Mishtabura. My Sefer Mishtabura, my Mekayris are on the bottom in the Sharat Tzion, also in the Bir Halacha, that's my Sefer. But sometimes he wants you to know something that a Chashav Achron said, and he wants it to be not a part of his Sefer, but he wants you to know it. That's, he puts in brackets. That's what he puts in brackets. You go through the Mishnah Berurah with this klal. In a lot of places, it answers a lot of questions. There's a Mishnah Berurah in Siman Shemem. He brings in brackets at Korban Sandal. That's where Rabbi Yankov Zichron Levracha was talking about. Ayin Sham, about a safety pin. Against my son Shabbos. Okay. Why am I telling you this, Rabbi Yisai? Because this idea that the Bir Halacha says over here is an incredible chiddush. The Bir Halacha is misupik. If a woman already was yatsa, could she be moitzi another woman? And if you look inside this Eshel Avram that the Mishnah Berurah is quoting, he has all types of sfeikis. If a man was already yotzei, could he be moitzi a lady? So let's back up a step. If a man comes home and he was yotzei kiddush, could he be moitzi another a woman in kiddush? However, a woman is chayiv in kiddush, zachar v'shamer. This week's parsha, kol sheyeshnei b'zachar, yeshnei b'shamer. And Mamela, Kol Sheish B'Shamer Yesh Mezacher. So Mamela, a woman is chayiv in a Torah in Kiddush. Kach it says in the Gemara in Pesachim, Kach in Mavur in Shulchan Aruch and Siman Reish Ayin Aleph La'alacha. A woman is chayiv in a Torah in Kiddush. So let's say a person, let's say there's an almana situation or such a situation. So a man, he's already yotzei Kiddush, and he wants to go and make Kiddush for the almana. And even though we say it's maybe better for her to make her Kiddush herself, and Derech Agav, she's not going to grow a beard. That's something maybe by Avdallah, but by Kiddush, she's not growing any beard. But a lot of people, that the lady doesn't want to make her own Kiddush. So can I make Kiddush for her? There was a certain almana that lived on my block, and I, in the situations, would make Kiddush for her, and I was already yotzei Kiddush. Is that allowed? So this would be totally in this shaila. Is there arvis between me and a woman? Maybe there's only arvis at arvis mayav between men. Who says that there's arvis between men and women, or women and women? Because maybe the concept of arvis that connects us is only men and men. Who says that there's a concept of arvis? Arvis came at arvis moyev, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu put us all together and made your mitzvahs and my mitzvahs dependent on one on the other. But maybe by women there was no arvis. This is a shaila of the Pri Megadim. If you notice the name Eshel Avram, it's the same one. The Pri Megadim has been supik about this in Reish Ayin Aleph. The Dagel Mirvava, that's the Neid of Yehuda in Reish Ayin Aleph. He has sfeikis in general. He says, I don't know, maybe a man can't be moitzi late. Avad, if a man wasn't yotzei yet kiddush and he's coming to make kiddush on a Friday night for his family, so they yotzei with shemek aina. But can I be moitzi you? Do I say that if you weren't yotzei, there's a part of me that hasn't been yotzei, and therefore I can be moitzi you? The Dagam Mervav is not sure. He's not so happy about this. Goina Godel Rabbeinu Akiva Eger over there, and also in Siman Zayin, Goina Godel Akiva Eger shows that there was arvis bein on men and bein on women and even chinuch children. There's arvis, and it's the interesting thing is that the tzlach, very interesting. The tzlach has a very interesting sad that he wants to say. The tzlach, if you notice, was the Noda B'Yehuda. He's also the Dagel Mervava, same fellow, Rabbi Landau. And he has it sad that even if you'll say there's no arvis, which I told you, he had it sad like that on a kiddush on a Friday night. If I was Yaitzi, I can't be Yaitzi somebody, a woman. But he has it sad, a very interesting sad, that he has it sad that with Shemea Ka'oina, this is Mechudesh, maybe before I go to the Chidushim. Let's say it like this. He has it sad that, let's say there's a man being moitzi another man, which he could do, because there's for sure arvis between two men. So then, very interesting idea. Then he says, then if there's a lady listening in, then you could be moitzi her too. Again, I on Friday night made kiddush. I was yaitze kiddush. Okay. For some reason, my son and my daughter, above bar mitzvah, I don't want to get involved in the complicated cases. They come and now they ask me to be moitzi them in kiddush. So now, says the tzlach, even though I hold it's not pashut that a man can be moitzi a woman, because there's no arvis, if I have already been yaitze, so, but the man, says the Noda B'Yehuda, I for sure could be yaitze, because there's a part of me that hasn't been yaitze yet. Says the tzlach, now that I'm being moitzi the man, and I'm allowed to do that, the woman's allowed to listen in, and she's yaitze shemei ka'ina. As if to say, when I am doing it for myself, then she could listen in. You understand? When he hasn't been yaitze, I'm doing it for myself. Because if there's a friend of mine that hasn't been yaitze, that means there's a part of me that hasn't been yaitze. Says the tzlach, then she could listen in. So this is the big fight. Does a woman have arvis? And this generated a tremendous rush in the world, Rabbi Isai, because there were those achrayim that asked the Shaila on any Friday night, how do you make kiddush for your wife? What do I mean? You were already yaitze kiddush according to some poskim. The Sefer talks about the Magen Avraham. It could be when you were in shul and you said Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Shabbos in Shmona Esrei. You were already yaitze kiddush deraisa. You come home, you want to make kiddush. You were yaitze kiddush deraisa. Your wife, she hasn't made kiddush yet, not the Rabbana, not the Raisa. So you're making a Rabbanan kiddush, and you want to be moitzi her in a deraisa kiddush? We just said there's a potential that there's no arvis, because you'd have no arvis to your wife, even though ishta kegufa, that's nice for shalom bayis. But maybe you have no arvis on your wife. So you're making a Rabbanan kiddush, and she needs a deraisa kiddush. So this is what prompted a world war, Abba Isai. And this is where our Rebbe, the Mishnah Berurah, in the Bir Halacha, Shar Tzion also, Shar Tzion Reish Ayin Aleph Siv Tes, and the Pri Megadim himself in the Sefer Rosh Yosef, and Goyin Rebbe Kiva Eger, and the Chasam Sefer, and the Avnei Nezer and Taf Lamed Tes, they all say that they don't hold like this other tzad, and that there is arvis to a woman. Why? On anything that a lady is chayiv, like kiddush, she's chayiv, then there's arvis. If a lady's not chayiv, I can't make a bracha on lulav for a lady. I can't make the bracha on the shofar for the lady. You know why? Because she's not chayiv in lulav. She's not chayiv in shofar. That's taka mitzvah to say shesman grama. So I don't have arvis on her. Klape that. That is true. That's true. So I can't make the bracha for her. But something she's chayiv in, like in this week's parsha, a woman is chayiv in kiddush. So therefore, even if I was Yotzei Kiddush, says Rebbe Kiva Eger and the Pri Megadim himself in Rosh Yosef, and our Rebbe, the Mishnah Berurah, and Avnei Nezer, they all say L'Halacha on anything that a woman is chayiv in, then yes, there's a part of you that hasn't yet been Yotzei the mitzvah if she hasn't been Yotzei the mitzvah. There are those that say that even according to Noda B'Yehuda, you can be Moitzi your wife on a Friday night. Why? There's no arvis to a woman. Yes, but why were you Yotzei Kiddush? Because you said Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Shabbos. So maybe you were Yotzei Kiddush deraisa. You know what? After she lit the candles, she turned around and said, "Good Shabbos." Rebbe Kiva Eger says, then maybe she was also Yotzei, the mitzvah of Kiddush Min HaTorah, by saying a praise of Shabbos. And that's why the Minhag Yisrael is when you walk into the house, you say, good Shabbos. And then she says back, good Shabbos. So then maybe she was anyways Yotzei. And there's other cheshbonis here, because maybe you weren't really Yotzei in davening, because you didn't have kavanah to be Yotzei in davening. But the halacha l'maisa is on anything that a woman is chayiv in, and she did not do yet, so then I have a responsibility to help her be Mekayim her mitzvah. And if she hasn't been Mekayim her mitzvah, it means there's a part of me which also hasn't been Mekayim my mitzvah. Nafkamina, back to Megillah. A woman is chayiv in Megillah. If a woman is chayiv in Megillah, that's what you saw over here, hakol chayavim. So then even though I was already yotzei, or even if a woman was already yotzei, but al kapanim, there's a chiyav that I have to be moitzi her. Why? Why do I have a chiyuv to be moitzi her? Because it's a part of me that hasn't been yotzei. Now I have a little bit of a suffix. Maybe that's why if you look in the Bir Halach over here, he never talks about a man. He only has a question of a woman to a woman. Maybe by a woman, there's no concept of arvis at all. That's interesting. Ironically, me, a man, I got the concept of arvis and arvis mayiv. So Mamela, even if I was yotzei Megillah, can read for a woman, which is the general case anyways. But maybe a woman, if she was already yotzei, maybe she can't read for another woman. That's what Takaviva Geshmak is nach. Maybe a woman can't read for another woman because she never had the din of arvis. So it comes out a very ironic thing. A man that there was a whole shaila about in Reish Ayin Aleph, we paskin can yes be mitzi a woman even if it was yaitze, but a woman, it never got off the ground because she never had the chiv of arvis. That's why the Bir Halacha brings the suffix over here, even though he paskin already in Reish Ayin Aleph that we do have arvis on a woman, but that was a man to a woman. But on a woman to a woman, that's not pashit. That's why he brings it in a bracket over here. And that's number one. Number two is, Rabbi Isai, very interesting, the Har Tzvi, First Pesach, the great Rabbi Yerushalayim, in the 122nd tshuva over there in Har Tzvi. Frank, he says, maybe by Megillah, maybe it's different. It's very interesting. I'm sure if you're learning now Megillah, you're going to hear a lot of this raid. So I'll be the first maybe to tell you an idea in this raid. Maybe by Megillah, there's a different reason why I could be moitzi a woman, even if there's no arvis, even according to the Noid of Yehuda and the Dagel Mervava. You know why? Even if I was already yaitze, you know why? It's like the Har Tzvi, because Gevaldik Gevart. We're going to see in Mitzvah Hashem, there's a whole shaila. If the din of Megillah on a woman is just shmiya or kriya, and this you're going to, I'm sure, hear shiuring about, is it a din shmiya that she just has to hear, but she doesn't really have to read? She doesn't have to read out of a Megillah. Obviously, you need to hear from a kosher Megillah, but it's not a din mikra, and that's the whole shaila why the ladies make a bracha l'shmoya Megillah, not l'kra mikra Megillah. Okay, but al kapanim, if there's a tzad that a woman only has to shemeya the Megillah, so then this is very interesting tzad. It could be that we don't need to come on to the regular rules of shemeya ka'oina, and that might be it's enough just to hear. It's enough, therefore, if a bar chiyuva, like a man, even if he was yaitze already, but it might be enough that he's reading from the Megillah, says the Har Tzvi, and even if it's not my responsibility, your mitzvahs, even if you would hold like the Noid of Yehuda, but maybe Megillah is different. It's enough just a din shmiya, and therefore it would be enough that he hears, that she hears from. Who cares that I can't be yaitze now? But you all agree that it's a human being who's a Jew who's reading it, and that's a big sad. I want you to think about that, and we're going to go weiter. But that's shaila number one. So if your women decide to stay home, your daughters, your wives, because of the matziv, because of whatever, totally justified according to the Mishnah Berurah. Are you going to be allowed to read for them, even though you already heard Megillah? Absolutely, according to the way we paskin, a man for sure is going to be allowed to, even though he was already yotzei. But what happens? You have situations like you have a lady that's not going to be able to get out, and you're not going to be able to come to her house. Either she's in quarantine or you're in quarantine. She's not letting anybody into the house. She's scared, and rightfully so. She's scared of the situation. So she doesn't want anybody coming into her house. So she says, could you just read me the Megillah on the phone? I'll listen on the phone. Now, obviously, in a regular year, like, there's no shaila, like Rav Moshe says at the end of the tshuva, as I heard from Rabbi Gadisman at the end of this year, in a regular year, Rav Moshe says, don't get involved in microphones and telephones and this and everything and that. the shayla this year. The shayla this year is there may be a mukim for a kula on a telephone. I keep saying telephone because on Zoom, there is a lot of times a time delay. I mean, you guys don't know this, but it could be what you're hearing from me right now. I said about 5 minutes ago, but all right, don't worry. If you notice, the beard got a little whiter during this year. But Zoom, I get nervous. There could be a time delay, and I'm not convinced about that. But certainly on a telephone, there's a shayla. What's the din? Can I listen to Megillah on a telephone? And we have to have unbelievable hakara and chshivas for the sugya we're learning, because this is exactly the sugya where the Das Torah, the Bajana, the Marsham discusses the shayla of microphone, that type of idea. He doesn't talk about a microphone. But the nidin that he discusses is he talks about a kol, a voice that came out of a cave, which is unrelated even to an echo. And he wants to know, Yotzei, and he has a whole nidin over here. The Mincha Shloima, Rabbi Rabbeinu HaGadol, the Mincha Shloima, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach in Siman Tes, has a very famous tshuva where he proves, at least he claims conclusively, that it's no better than Alexandria Shel Mitzrayim. What does he mean? He means, as you all know, the Talmidei Chachamim over here know that in Alexandria Shel Mitzrayim, there was this great big stadium, right? A great big Colosseum, right? And the whole oilam would come over there and they would hear davening there and whatever, and how would you hear the bracha? You can't hear the bracha. So how did I know when to say amen? So they would pick up a flag. Whoever saw bells, they have like a ganze stecken and an oar, and they whack so everybody knows to say amen. So it's the same type of azar. So kapanim, everyone knows that there's a sugya. They would wave the flag. I'd know to say amen. Now, boy, say, could you be Yotzei Havdalah because he's picking up the flag and you know right now he's saying Havdalah? Says Rishon Mizaman, that's a galechta. When they pick up the flag, it means they're saying Havdalah. Could I be Yotzei Havdalah? Of course not. Could I say amen? That the Gemara says yes. Why? Because I know right now there was a yid that said this and this bracha. So I'm saying amen to that bracha. As long as you're following along and you know what they're up to in Chazaras Hashatz, even if you're not hearing it, but you know what they're up to, so you can say amen because you know that second this bracha was said. But to be Yotzei, how could you be Yotzei? You didn't hear the words. You just know that the words were said. Says Rosh Shlomo Zalman, anyone who knows about how microphones and how telephones and all these things work knows that it's a wave and it's a replica of your voice, a computerized replica of your voice. And therefore, all it is the knowledge that a bracha has just been made. So therefore, do you want to know if you could say amen? Rosh Shlomo Zalman has a tzad that even that he's not so happy with. Because it's true, you know, a bracha was just made, but maybe the whole chiddush was only by Alexandria Shel Mitzrayim, when we were all in the stadium together, and I know a bracha was made, and I'm in the vicinity of the bracha, but maybe okay, so this is a fight. Rosh Shlomo Zalman wasn't happy about this. Others say, no, you know a bracha was being made right now, so you could say amen as long as there's no time delay. I told you, Zoom, I'm not convinced. But that all says, going Rosh Shlomo Zalman, is we want to say amen. But it says Rosh Shlomo Zalman, could you be Yotzei Havdalah? Because I know right now that you said Havdalah on the phone. So then that's not your voice. It's a replica of your voice. All it is like a flag telling me that you said Havdalah. It happens to be this flag sounds exactly like you. And it happens to be this flag. I know that every word you're saying, and I hear every word you're saying, but I'm not hearing you. There's a little guy inside the phone who's saying the voice. He's a guy. So you can't be Yotzei with him. That says the guy Rosh Shlomo Zalman. Rosh Shlomo Zalman says over here very sharp words. He says anyone who says not like this doesn't know the metzias of a microphone, of a telephone, v'chadoima. However, Rabbi Isai, our two great gedolim, the two greatest gedolim, what should I tell you? The two greatest gedolim that lived in the last 75 years, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zeichat Tzadik L'Vracha, and the Chazon Ish, Milanu Gadol Meir Moshe and the Chazon Ish, and both of these skyscrapers, they both said that they're not convinced. They're not convinced. And Rosh Shlomo Zalman was not afraid of anyone. Rosh Shlomo Zalman brought it in the ha'ara that you all saw on the 74th page of the Mincha Shloima. He brings down the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish said, I'm not convinced. And Rav Moshe spells it out. When I'm talking to the person right next to me, how does it work? How did the Rebbeinu Shalom make it? He made that this sound wave hits this sound wave to that micro, to that wave, until it gets to your ear. Says Rav Moshe, not convinced. Every time you're hearing me speak, it's as a result of the grumma of my voice. The sound wave caused that wave, which caused that wave, which caused that wave. So that wave was created by the first effort. So every time I'm hearing you, it's also not considered necessarily my voice. That is a sound wave. Ibazai says Ramesha. So if I speak into a phone, if I speak into a microphone, and it makes a replica that it copies as a result of my voice, maybe that's also considered to a certain extent me. Maybe that's also my coil. Ramesha Feinstein not convinced. So, and Ramesha Feinstein understood. Even though Shlomo Zalman said a very emphatic statement, nobody would say not like this unless they don't understand the Metzias. Ramesha in the Tshuva is saying, I understand the Metzias, and Afapiken, I'm disagreeing. Now, the halacha, as you saw, Ramesha is talking about Megillah. He's not thrilled with this psak, this idea. Ramesha Bain in the second volume, I think it was in the 108th simon. Ramesha in the 126th simon over there in the Eis Daled. Ramesha talks about this in two different places, Kuf Chavav, Kuf Ches, and in both places, Ramesha is not convinced. Not convinced. Halacha l'maisa, it certainly is not lechatchila to listen to a havdalah on a microphone or havdalah on a telephone. And I once heard from Rav Ruvain, soll sein gesund, that when his wife, I think it was his wife, Zechron Levracha, was in the hospital after a baby, and the shaila was that should she listen to havdalah on the phone, or should she make her own havdalah on milk, which is a very big Safek Chamer Medina, especially today, but Akoponim even then wasn't so pashit. And I think Rabbi Yisha said to make Havdalah on milk and to not be Saimich on listening to Havdalah on the phone. And it's certainly not pashit to listen to a shofar on the phone might be a lot worse. That's a very good question, because that could be taka no better than the Das Torah's super echo. That's a much more complicated shaila, and I appreciate that shaila. But the Gabe, at least listening to Havdalah on the phone, you see, even Ramosha was willing to fathom aside that it would be Mako. He wasn't convinced. He wasn't convinced. Halacha l'maisa, Avada, a person shouldn't listen to Megillah on the phone. Mitzad Sheni, Avada, if a person says it's either that or I'm not listening to Megillah, so I wouldn't make a bracha, but they should certainly do it, right? V'oi, there's a shtickle eitza. Maybe if somebody will read you on the phone, let's say you tell this lady that she'll listen on the phone, and if she would have in front of her a kosher Megillah, which are quite accessible today, no, maybe she doesn't want the person coming into her house, and she doesn't want the breathing and everything. But if she gets a Megillah and she would read it while he reads it to her, no, and she'll make sure she reads every word. So then anyway, she'll be yotzei. But l'aloch l'maisa, to say you're yotzei with the Megillah is a very shver shaila. Certainly you can't make a bracha. B'diavad, if a person has no breira, you have no breira. So you can be saimich on that side of the Goyin Rav Moshe and that side of the Chazayin Ish, l'chayra. Now, that's l'chayra part one of these shailas. The shaila of a woman at home and listening on the phone. Now, in general, you all know what happens if you miss a word. It's not just if you miss a word, Rabbi Isai. It's if you miss a few psukim also. As long as you don't miss half of the Megillah, and you're reading inside, even if you're not reading inside a kosher Megillah. So let's say, I'll give you an example. I come late to shul. How could it be I come late to shul? On Purim, there's no shilas. It's only a kasha if you don't have any shilas. So I come late to shul, and they're already up to the second parak. So the halacha is, I could read even in Chumash, not a kosher Megillah. I could read very fast and catch up to them, even though you're starting the Megillah. And there's a big mistake that people make. There's a Shulchan Aruch in Tav Reish Sadi and Sif Dalid that people make a mistake. The Shulchan Aruch there says, if you are missing the start of a Megillah, so then you can't be yotzei. But that's talking about the Megillah itself. If the Megillah itself is missing a few words, it's kosher. But that's only if it's not missing the first words and the last words. It's got to start out with a Megillah. On that, the Mishabura, the Biur Halacha says, that's all if you're talking about is the Megillah kosher. But let's say the Baal Koire is reading, of course, out of a kosher Megillah. All the Megillahs you guys are reading out are kosher Megillahs. And I come in late, and I'm going to be a part of that reading as long as I read less than half of the Megillah. The first parak is fine, Rabbi Isai. So you can read the whole first parak to yourself. That means you walk in, you missed the first parak. So what do? You're afraid it's Corona. You don't know if you're going to get another minyan. I mean, halavai, it won't be Corona, but you're afraid it won't be another minyan. So quickly say the bracha to yourself. Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, and you make the bracha l'shmoya Megillah, and then quickly catch up, make a shachiyanu, and quickly, the whole business, asanisa, make your own brachas, quickly catch up, and you'll catch up to him, and then you'll listen along. To the Baal Koirei, very interesting. Yediyah ayin in the Bir Halacha, Tafresh Shadi Sif Gimel, Dibber Amaskel, Dafke. That's another nice idea. The Mishnah over here, the Shulchan Aruch brings over here that you should bring the Ketanim. You should bring the kids to the shul. The Bir Halacha says, interesting chiddush in the Bir Halacha, he says it means bring the children that are the age of chinuch to shul, but don't bring the non-chinuch age children to the shul. Rav Breish, the Chelkas Yankiv, says everybody who reads the Mishnah Berurah realizes that that's very, very schwer. That's very schwer. Shulchan Aruch says, Minig toiv lahavi ktanim uktanis l'shmaya mikra Megillah. This is very, very schwer. This is very, very schwer to say this. That it's going on children that are chinuch. Of course I have to bring children that are chinuch to shul. What's the chiddush? Minig toiv lahavi ktanim uktanis. So the Rav Breish says, nah, it must mean it's going on children that aren't of a chinuch age, and they're 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds, and they're not chinuch age, and you should still bring them to shul to be a part of the matziv, so that they should ask you, what's going on, and that you'll tell them all the nisim that the Rebbeinu Shalom did. But this seems to be a very big fight. That's the Levush. The Levush says you bring the children, even non-chinuch age, to shul, so that you say, what's going on, so that you should realize that there was a grace and nace. But the Mishnah Berurah learns not like that. Mishnah Berurah says it's going on the Gil Chinuch, and it's telling you yes to bring the Gil Chinuch children. Now the Mishnah Berurah himself in the Bir Halacha, he says he asked this question himself. He says, how could it be the Shulchan Aruch is telling you to bring Gil Chinuch? Of course you have to bring Gil Chinuch. They have a responsibility. So he says, no, the pshat is because the chiddush is bring them to shul and don't just read to them in the house. That's how he learns. That's how he learns. If Nitin Rishos, maybe I'll be moist of something I heard from the Melech of all of Klal Yisrael, from Rav Eliashiv Zecher Tzadik Levracha. I asked Rav Eliashiv this shaila, what's pshat in the halacha of the Shulchan Aruch, and he said like the Bir Halacha. The Bir Halacha is pshat. You have to bring the chinuch age children to shul. So I asked him the Bir Halacha's kasha. If you have to bring chinuch children to shul, what's the chiddush? Of course, you have to bring chinuch age children to shul. I was expecting him to say the Bir Halacha, go weiter, right? He said an interesting word. He said, not every gil chinuch age child, every 5-year-old, 6-year-old is capable of listening to the whole entire Megillah. And we all know if you miss one word, you're not Yaitse. So he said, so technically, a child is not chayiv in Megillah probably until the age of 10, 11, until he can listen to every word and make up what he's missing. No 6-year-old Rabbi Isai is capable of listening to every single word. And if he misses a word, to quickly say it. So he said that's maybe what the chiddush of the Bir Halacha is that even though technically a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old are not chayiv, but you should still bring him to shul. And even though he's not really chayiv, gil chinuch here doesn't mean the real chinuch, because he's not a real chinuch until the age of 10, 11. And that's what the Shulchan Aruch is saying. But don't bring a 2-year-old that's going to make the oilam crazy maybe to shul, that far not. And therefore, it's very nafkamina, very big. So if a lady wants to know, should she stay home and watch her 2-year-olds and her 3-year-olds and everything, or send them off to shul? Not to push it. Certainly not to push it. And therefore, and their husband will be mitzvah when he comes home. But Sam, it's an interesting thing. Not every child is capable of that. Which brings me to an interesting thought, Rabbi Isai. You all know the Gemara that says a menamnim is yotzei Megillah. It's very negeya. You think, what's in negeya? Menamnim, the famous Gemara in Megillah, Daf Yates, I think, Yeches over there. Nim v'loi nim, tir v'loi tir. You know where it's negeya? The Eretz Tzvi, the Kazik lover. And also Rosh Hashiva Chachmei Lublin, and also the great Rabbeinu Agadol, Rav Aaron Kotler, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, the Melech Shel Kol Beis Yisrael. They said a moiridik deher in this Gemara. They said, you know what the case is of menamnim and nim v'loi nim and tir v'loi tir that you yaitz in Megillah? They said like this. They said, what happens if a person is reading Megillah and he starts daydreaming? Why would you daydream in the middle of Megillah? I'll explain, Rabbi Isai. All of a sudden, in walks into shul. Hey, he's dressed like a schnitzel. Hey, look at that. Look at that interesting costume over there. Interesting schnitzel. And then you see the guy next to him is a little tipsy, Rabbi Isai, a little bit in Lashon Naki. Maybe he's a little bit more than tipsy. And there you see, look at that. Look at that. He's dressed like a schnitzel. And then you see the guy there. Hey, look at that. And he's coming with ketchup. This all goes on during Purim, Rabbi Isai. You know what goes on during Purim. And he's sitting there and he's putting ketchup and he's about to eat him. And then all of a sudden you have, Haman. And you lost the last 5 psukim, right? So we know the halacha is you got to make it up. But said the Eretz Tzvi, the Kazik Clover, and Rav Aaron Zeichat Tzadik Levracha. That's all if you're like in a different world. And hey, my finger is over here in the Chumash, and now they're up to over here in the Chumash, and mine over here, and they're over there. So that's called you missed it. The words bounced right off. That's not called that you were Yotzei. But what happens, says the Kazik Clover, if I have no idea how, but my finger got, and this happens for Boisai. I have no idea how, but I'm listening to Megillah, and somehow they got to Vayavoy Amon, and I wake up, but my finger's there. You're listening, and so that's called nim v'loy nim and tir v'loy tir. That's called menamnim. That's your yotzei. If somehow you followed along, there's a bechina within you that you were actually listening, then you're yotzei. Mashenkin, if you have no idea where they're up to, and you're in a different world, in that form of daydreaming, so then you're not yotzei. Derech Agav, this is why Rabbi say, if you have a 7-year-old child and you want to lane Megillah for him, I don't think I would make a bracha on that case. I don't think I would tell the kid to make a bracha. I don't think he has a chiyuv in chinuch, because I don't think he's going to be able to halt cup the entire Megillah. And if he misses a word and he's going to make it up and he's going to read it like we know to do, I wouldn't make a bracha. The Peli Yoyitz already says by a lady not to make a bracha because of this reason. Okay, maybe our ladies, halavai, we should be on the level of these ladies, most of them. But I don't know if that you should make a bracha on a child. Now, this year, if L'tzarenu, someone is not going to be able to go to a Megillah reading and he needs help in the trop, he doesn't know the trop, and he's going to have to lay in the Megillah himself. So could he listen on earphones or something to somebody laying the Megillah and laying along? Kimat, this is a Shar Tshuva and Siman Tafrei Stadi and Siv Aleph, that Kimat, this is the Eitzah. He's not talking about earphones, obviously, but it's Kimat the Eitzah. You just have to be careful, because the Mishabura brings down by us that HaKoirei, when a person reads, Tzarech L'shmoya La'oznai. And the Mishabura goes so far as to say, is it sad that if you don't hear what you're saying, you might not be yotzei. So certainly, even in the shul, when you're making up a word, make sure that it's shemei lo'izna. Now, Baisai, it doesn't mean it has to be shemei to the oizin of the guy next to you. Some people think that they're the chazin for bells, b'shas ne'ilah on Yom Kippur, when he's in the shul davening sometimes. It means you have to hear it to your ear. It doesn't mean you have to hear it to somebody else's ear. But if you're listening on earphones or something like that, and you're going to lane along, make sure you're hearing it. That's why I don't know if I'd listen to earphones, because then you won't hear yourself laning. And let's go fight. Derech Agav, Rabbi Isai, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention something that I heard from Rab David Soloveitchik, Zeichet Tzadik Levracha, the great Goyin, the great Tzadik. I once heard from him, what's the pshat that on Purim, and the Megillah, the Gemara says already that we say Kriyusa Zei Halilusa. We don't make halal. We say the Kriya is halal. That's the Gemara says. One of the answers to the Gemara why we don't say halal on Purim is because the Kriya is the halal. But Rabbi say we don't say that on Pesach. We don't say on Pesach that the Kriya is the halal. The HaRaya, we say the Agada, which is the whole story. And then afterward, we say halal, also in the middle of the Agada. I asked this question to the great Tzaddik, Reb David Soloveitchik, Zeichet Tzadik Levracha, and he told me what he heard. This Shaila from the Brisker Rav, what he heard from his father, who heard from Reb Chaim, who heard from the Beis Halevi. Nebuch, you're hearing it from me. I'm sorry, Rabbi Isai. But this you're hearing from Reb David, who said from the Rav, who said from Reb Chaim, who said from Beis Halevi. They said that when it comes to Hallel of the Megillah, that was the tzura of the Hallel, is going over the nace. That is the tzura, going over the nace and seeing the Hester Panim and seeing that it's not Hester and it's a Shkacha Pratis. But by Pesach, there, it's Chayev Adam Laharis, it's Atzmai Kiluhu Le'atzam Mitzrayim. There, you're leaving Mitzrayim. If you have the Kasha, so then then your Seder, there's something wrong with your Seder. You're at the point of the Seder when you were Yotzim Mitzrayim, now you have to have your own Hallel. That's why Avad over there, you make a Hallel. I ain't in the Brisker Rav about this. Now, but I say, it's Toiv Lahachmir, that when you're touching a Megillah, for all those, a lot of times, we never had Megillahs before, but this year you might have to lay in your own Megillah. It's Toiv La'achmir to wash your hands before the Megillah, because it is Kisvei Kodesh. The Chayyadam, as it's sad, that during a meal, they were for sure geyser, and if you were in the middle of a meal and you start laying in the Megillah and you touch the Megillah with your hands, you might have to wash your hands again for the meal. Hagam the Bi'alacha in Kuf Samachay says, he doesn't paskin like this Chayyadam, but he says Toiv La'achmir. Toiv La'achmir. Now, Baisai, a few cases, somebody, L'tzarenu, chas v'chalila lo'aleinu. He knows he won't be able to hear a Megillah. For example, Chalila, he's going to have an operation, or Chalila. I don't want to say what the Chalilas are, and Halavai they'll be Nahapaychu, but he knows that in 2 days from now, he's not going to be able to hear Megillah. So the Shulchan Aruch in Tafresh Peiches, in Sif Zayin, in Sif Ches, Paskins, that you're allowed to read Megillah on Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, beforehand, if necessary, but without a bracha. He goes so far as to say you could even maybe read Megillah from Rosh Chodesh. And if a person didn't read on Yud Daled because they were sick and they, I don't know, Chalila, Halavai, they get off of the ventilator and then they get off on Tesvav, he'll read it on Tesvav, but without a bracha. We shouldn't know. If a person is in a hospital or something, it's a bad situation, and they offer him to read Megillah at night or to read Megillah during the day, but you can only get one, or he could only handle concentrating in one. So this is a world war. The Aruch HaShulchan seems to say what we would have thought, so read it at night, first come, first serve. Mitzvah baliyatcha al tachmitzena. But there's a big pell on this. And the Shar Tshuva says, not like that. The Shar Tshuva in Siman Tafresh Pei Zayin brings in the Yehuda that the day Megillah, Kimavur in the Mishabura, and Tafresh Pei Zayin, and also in Tafresh Shadi and Sivkot and Mem Gimel, the day Megillah is Midivrei Kabbalah, and the night Megillah is Midirabanan. Divrei Kabbalah is much stronger. And that has a din of a deraisa, even Kim'at. Therefore, if you have a choice of doing the day Megillah or the night the Megillah, the Mishabura goes so far as to say, if you didn't have Kavanah at night, you're Yotzei, because it's Drabanan, mitzvahs don't need Kavanah. But Mashenke by deraisa, maybe not Yotzei. So therefore, if a person has a choice, it would sound like he should choose the day Megillah, because the day, obviously, assuming that, there's no risk he might not get it. But if it's Vade, he'll get it. The person says, I'm coming to the hospital once, and you choose. Mustami, you have to choose the day Megillah, because the day Megillah has a din of a deraisa. Also, Rabbi Yisai, let's say a person is a chayla, interesting shayla, he's a chayla, and he's only, this happens on Purim all the time, a person was drunk and he's a chayla, and he's starting to read the Megillah right before Shkia. So then don't make a bracha, the poskim say, or whatever your Shkia is. The Haimish mentioned, Zaben Zayin Shkia, Mayin Shkia, yeah, Dainim Dain Shkia. But let's say you're Litvish fellow and by Shkia. So if you're not going to finish the Megillah by Shkia, so then you can't make a bracha on this Megillah. But what happens, and this was in Ma'aseh Shai last year, there was a fellow who was reading the Megillah. He thought he wasn't going to finish it by Shkia. So he asked me afterward, he did the wrong thing, but he asked me afterward, he realized about 5 minutes before Shkia, he is going to finish before Shkia. So I told him, so then right then and there, make the bracha in the middle of the Megillah. In the middle of the Megillah, because there's still a part of the Megillah that you're reading without a bracha. Another thing, Rabbi Yisai, the Shartzin and Tafresh Pei Zayin and Sivkot and Yud discusses the big shaila about going to a minyan with Rav Am, and he says never cancel your shul to go to a bigger shul. He says, but let's say you have a private minyan in the house that sometimes you do cancel, so then there is a mile of Rav Am. But that brings us to a lot of the shailas this year. People have private minyanim in their houses that have been going for a very, very long time and that they never cancel. So it could be there, the Mishabura would agree, stay in your minyan, because that minyan has been the whole entire time and has never stopped. And therefore you don't necessarily need to go to the big shul, especially obviously if it's a shaila of health-wise, that's a different shaila. I'll end with an interesting shaila, Rabbi Yisai. If I'm not mistaken, some of you fellows live in the city. In what was the one that Columbus had gekaufen for a couple of trinkets, Manhattan. So, Rabbi Yisai, when do you guys in Manhattan read the Megillah? When do you guys over there in the city read the Megillah? What's the shaila? The Gemara has a shaila, Rabbi Yisai, that in Tveria, maybe Tveria is called a walled city. Why is it a walled city? Because what's the lumdis of a walled city? The lumdis of a walled city is that it's an actual wall. Or no, the lumdis of a walled city is that it's protected. So Tveria, says the Gemara, is on the water, so therefore it's protected. So the Gemara is a suffix in Tveria. When do you read the Megillah? Is it considered a walled city from Yeshua ben Nun, and therefore you read it on Tezvav? Or no, it's not called a walled city because there's no wall, and therefore you read on Yadalit, it's a suffix, and Yamachmir, you read it on both days and whatever. Baisai, Manhattan, the last time I checked over there, aren't you guys surrounded by a whole water, if I'm not mistaken, over there? You got the whole thing is surrounded by water, no? Isn't the whole entire Manhattan surrounded by Azoi Bazoi? So then maybe it's called the walled city. Maybe it's called the walled city. If it's called the walled city, so then maybe you guys have to read on Tesvav. But then you get involved. Yeah, but until Columbus, Akikimin, they didn't know that the world was round. Even Yerushalmi knew it was round, and Taisus and Gittin knew it was round, but they didn't know it was round. So that nobody lived over there, Bechlal. A few Pocahontas, maybe, but not so many people lived over there. So besides, maybe it wasn't walled, quote unquote, from the time of Yeshua ben Nun because it wasn't Nisyashiv. But that's not so pashit. Maybe all you need to know is, was it walled? So this is a shtickle interesting shaila. I'm sure that you'll enjoy discussing that shaila. I think, as you know, the meaning is probably to read it on your Daled. Another interesting shaila is if a person has a choice of Megillah, it's very right. It's related to the Erev shaila, Ayin and the Igros Moshe, and about 7 different shuvas, Ayin Sham, Al Kapanim. But when it comes to the shaila of a Megillah or a Suda, let's say a person has a choice, Megillah or Suda. So we say, the Iker mitzvah is Megillah. But what if he has a choice of Megillah or Mincha? Somebody last year had this child. He told me it's 20 minutes before Shkia, it's either Megillah or Mincha. I told him that it's a shver shaila, but I'm paskening Megillah. Why? Number one, Megillah is midivrei Kabbalah. Number two is tashlumim on Mincha, but there's no tashlumim on Megillah. Number three is that the Megillah is a mitzvah that has pirsuma nisa, Rabbi Isai. It's a divrei Kabbalah, it's pirsuma nisa, it's a mitzvah chaviva b'shaitai. So I paskin for him that he should do Megillah, and that afterward, later on, he'll daven 2 minchas. That's Rabbi Isai. Is what I have to tell you. I'll leave you with one more shaila. Rabbi say there's a whole shaila that Mishabur brings down in Sivkot and Nun Hey and Chartzi and Nun, that when I have an igeres, when I read the Megillah, I'm supposed to read it as an igeres, as you all know. What about a yochid? Does a yochid also have to read it as an igeres? You know what goes on in the shul? They fold and they fold and they fold and what? So the Mishabur says yes. The minig is not like this. The minig is not like this. And I must tell you something very interesting. I saw by the Melech of Kol Beis Yisrael, I saw by Rav Elyashiv, when Rav Elyashiv was hard of hearing. So then when he was reading along the Megillah, he was probably being Yotzei by himself. I'm not 100% sure, but maybe. And he didn't push it the Megillah. He just kept the Megillah rolled up. Halavai, Rabbi Isai, of an hapaychu, and the simcha that we have from learning this gishmaka simcha, gishmaka sugya should be the catalyst that was al zeicha zayin take, that the Rebbeinu Shalom should bring the neis, that salah and the final gula, Be'ez Hashem, b'mher b'yameinu, amen.